Why are you even here? We don't need you. Those were the exact words my daughter shouted at me as I stepped into the living room after spending 3 weeks preparing her favorite meals from scratch and reorganizing every inch of the house for her birthday. I froze in disbelief. I had dedicated not just time, but $4,276.53 on ingredients, decorations, and gifts meticulously picked out from the farmer's market on 5th Street in Charleston, South Carolina. I had even taken the day off work and rearranged my entire week to make sure the event would be perfect, and in 15 minutes, everything I built with love would seem to vanish before my eyes. My heart was racing and my hands trembled. As I realized that all my effort was treated with contempt and scorn, I could still hear the sound of the coffee brewing, the aroma of freshly baked apple pie lingering in the air, and the soft hum of the old sewing machine where I had stitched the tablecloth. It was supposed to be a morning of joy, a celebration of family and connection. Instead, it became a moment of rejection, humiliation, and shock. And as I stood there, my mind raced back to the countless nights I spent in the kitchen learning recipes from my mother in the 1970s, watching black and white shows on the old RCA TV, humming along to Elvis Presley, and the Supremes, imagining that one day I would pass on this legacy. And now it felt like a cruel joke. I could see my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, filming discreetly from the porch, her camera shaking slightly as if capturing the disbelief that hung thick in the air. My grandson peeked from behind the couch, whispering, "Mom, why is Grandma crying?" And I want to tell him everything about love, effort, betrayal, and the sting of being overlooked, but the words caught in my throat, and instead, I murmured nothing. I just smiled weakly like nothing had happened, but inside the turmoil was intense and crushing. I realized then that I needed to act not out of anger, but out of strategy one had always felt powerless in. Moments like these, being 62 and often dismissed in conversations and decisions by my own family members. But there was a part of me, they never knew, a quiet resilience and a financial buffer that could turn the tables in ways they would never imagine. I remember the exact bank statement dated March 14th, showing $21,763.84 saved for emergencies, trips, and personal indulgences. I remember the stash of gold coins inherited from my grandfather, kept hidden in the old cedar chest in the attic. The soft smell of cedar would mixing with the lingering scent of lavender from the sachets I had placed years ago for comfort. And now all of these memories became the fuel for what was to come. I had decided that this morning would mark the end of being underestimated, the end of invisible suffering, the end of quiet endurance. And in precisely 15 minutes from that fateful outburst, everyone in my household would learn a lesson in humility and respect. And I whispered to myself as I pressed the send button on my old iPhone, the message that would change everything. I faked my death and watched the confirmation red receipts go through each family group chat. The panic in the air became almost tangible as my daughter dropped her phone, and the vase of tulips on the dining table shivered from the tremor of shock. The sound of her gasp echoed through the hall, and I could almost see the ripple effect across the street where Mr. Carter was walking his dog, and Mrs. Henderson peeked from her curtains. I laughed. Softly, not in malice, but in the quiet satisfaction of the inevitable revelation. They had never seen me as powerful as I truly was. They had never suspected that the quiet elderly woman who baked pies and knitted blankets had a mind sharp enough to orchestrate such a masterstroke. And as I watched the messages pile up, frantic calls, misconnections, and sudden tears, my heart swelled with both sorrow for their panic and pride in the ingenuity of my plan. This was a precise moment that the story shifted from a narrative of invisibility to a saga of empowerment and revelation. And I knew that if you have ever felt dismissed, ignored, or unappreciated for decades, if you have ever spent years giving and sacrificing only to be met with scorn, then you will understand the sensation of seeing the world gasp as they realize that the person they thought powerless held the ultimate control. And I want you to reflect on your own life as you watch this unfold. And if you have ever been in a situation where your dedication was met with disregard, share below, because the shock of what comes next will resonate with everyone who has felt unseen, undervalued, and underestimated. And this was only the beginning, only the first chapter of a journey that would flip perceptions, ignite emotions, and prove that the quietest voices often harbor the loudest power. I grew up in a small town in Akron, Ohio, on Maple Street in a modest brick house. My parents worked tirelessly, my father repairing radios at his tiny workshop, and my mother sewing clothes for neighbors. And every Sunday morning the smell of fresh pancakes and coffee would fill the house, the aroma lingering in the warm sunlight that poured through lace curtains. And I learned early the value of dedication, sacrifice, and giving without expecting anything in return. I saved my first $12.37 at age 10 by collecting bottles and delivering newspapers. My first job at 16 in the corner diner paid $3.75 an hour, and I remember every tip carefully tucked into a small wooden box hidden beneath my bed. Every sacrifice mattered. Every hour worked was an investment in a life I imagined filled with family love and small joys. Fast forward to my adult years. I married my college sweetheart in 1984, and we settled in Charleston, South Carolina, renting a tiny apartment above a bookstore on King Street. I remember the smell of old paper, sound of the bell above the door, and the taste of homemade lemonade on hot summer afternoons. Together, we built a life slowly, carefully saving $9,832.12 for our first home, a small but cozy house on Willow Lane with yellow siding and a bright red door. The garden, my sanctuary, my roses planted by hand each spring, and vegetables carefully tended, every detail measured with patience and pride. I worked as an accountant at Thompson and Pierce for 28 years, starting in 1985, and my spouse managed a small boutique downtown. Every raise, every bonus, every extra project I took on, I calculated precisely how it would contribute to our security, our dreams, our children's education. We invested in them emotionally, financially, and spiritually, from piano lessons for my daughter every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. with Mrs. Collins, a retired music teacher whose house smelled of varnish and old sheet music, to summer camps at Lake Hartwell costing $1,295 per week for 2 children. We spared nothing because we believed in nurturing potential, even when it meant skipping our own vacations or declining dinners with friends on Fridays. I remember the exact date of our first family trip to New Orleans, February 14th, 1997, the streets bustling with jazz music and the scent of beignet in the humid air. Those memories are etched to me as proof of dedication and love. Yet over time, the signs of ingratitude crept to my children, increasingly preoccupied with friends and phones, a subtle dismissal at holiday dinners, a sarcastic remark about my cooking. Mom, why do you always make the same pie? And I let it slide, thinking it was harmless teenage rebellion, now grown into adult entitlement. I overlooked how my contributions were quietly devalued. I recall one evening on June 18th at precisely 7:43 p.m. standing in the kitchen as my daughter threw the silver spoon across the counter, hit the tile with sharp clang. And she said, "You're wasting your time with this food," her voice dripping with disdain. My spouse looked away, pretending not to hear, and I felt a wave of humiliation that I swallowed quietly as I cleaned up the mess, the smell of burnt sugar lingering in the air, mixing with the scent of the roses outside in the garden, a bittersweet combination of comfort and sting. I began noticing patterns in everyday life. Friends who once called weekly now skipped months between messages. Colleagues who once respected my opinion dismissed it with curt nods and minimal eye contact, even at my neighborhood's monthly community meeting at the old town hall. The same faces averted my gaze. I contributed ideas on budget planning and local events, meticulously written out on 8.5 by 11 line paper with colored ink and diagrams. Yet when the votes came, my suggestions were ignored or reallocated to others without acknowledgement. I recall the exact numbers of donations I made to local charities over the years: $3,450.67 in total, including the Little Free Library Project on 2nd Avenue and the Community Food Drive. Each December, the months I spent personally collecting canned goods from local grocers, the hours spent organizing volunteers and labeling boxes. Yet during the community recognition dinner on May 21st, the mayor gave a short thank you and moved on, praising someone else entirely. My heart sank, but my lips forced a polite smile. The texture of my dress itchy from the cheap polyester, yet I wore it because appearances matter. My hand trembling slightly as I sipped tepid tea from the chipped cup, the faint smell of lemon masking the kitchen odor. And I realized that year after year, my dedication was building a quiet reservoir of both power and frustration, a foundation that no one knew was there, a secret source hidden beneath decades of care and sacrifice. The $21,763.84 in savings tucked in my bank account, the small stack of gold coins from my grandfather, the careful network of friends and neighbors who trusted me with everything from keys to confidential matters. All these details created an invisible strength that I had not yet drawn upon. I remember the exact moment of clarity that came to me on March 3rd at 2:15 p.m. As I sat in the old rocking chair in the living room with the sun streaming through the window, casting patterns on the faded carpet, I realized that all the years of giving the love, the sweat, the meticulous attention to detail, and financial prudence were not being honored, and that this invisible power was mine to wield in a moment of justice and revelation. I began drafting quietly in my mind a plan, one that would not only reveal their ingratitude, but also assert the authority and respect that had been denied for decades, a plan that was patient, strategic, and unassailable. As the neighbors' children played hopscotch outside, the sun warm on my back, and the scent of freshly mown grass drifting through the open window, I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that the calm before the storm was perfect for what I intended to unleash in the coming hours. And if you have ever felt that your sacrifices have been ignored, your love taken for granted, or your years of dedication dismissed, remember that sometimes the power is quietly accumulating around you, waiting for the exact right moment to make the world acknowledge you. And I want you to hold on to that thought and reflect for a moment what it means to be unseen yet unbroken. And if you have ever experienced this silent injustice, share your story below, because the next chapter is where the humiliation escalates and the story shifts toward the transformation you never imagined. It started innocently enough on a Thursday morning, April 11th at 8:12 a.m. when I arrived at the Charleston Community Center for the monthly knitting circle, the wooden floors creaking beneath my steps, the faint smell of lavender from the sachets I always carried, and the softening of the air conditioning barely masking the chatter of neighbors exchanging gossip. But what greeted me was unexpected, a group of younger women led by my own daughter, whispering behind their hands. As I entered, there she is, wasting her time again. One of them said in a tone sharp enough to cut to the softened conversation. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, but I kept my voice calm. "Good morning, everyone. I brought the pattern sheets for our new project," I said, showing the meticulous charts and swatches for the upcoming charity auction. The tablecloths I had stitched years ago, still neatly folded in the corner, now looked like relics of irrelevance. The whispers grew louder. Phone was raised to fill me the lens, capturing every tremble of my hands and the subtle quiver of my voice as I tried to maintain dignity. The air thick with tension, the smell of coffee and cinnamon buns drifting from the kitchen only intensified the absurdity of my humiliation. And yet it was only the beginning. Later that evening at 7:47 p.m., I joined my daughter in the living room to discuss plans for the upcoming family reunion. She crossed her arms and said, "Mom, why do you always insist on doing everything yourself? Nobody even notices." I could feel the gaze of my grandson on me, the soft carpet under my feet itchy from the cheap rug we had bought 3 years ago to send the roses outside wafting faintly through the open window. I tried reasoning calmly. "I only want to contribute and make things pleasant for everyone." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You think your efforts matter, Mom, but really nobody cares." The words struck like a hammer, a blow to the chest. I kept my composure, but the humiliation was palpable. I walked away to the kitchen to collect my thoughts, the old tiles cold under my feet and the faucet leaking slightly dripping water that echoed in the quiet room. I tried to focus on the aroma of freshly baked bread I had set on the counter, yet every detail only reminded me of how dismissed my contributions had been. And when I later discovered the neighbor, Mr. Carter, had made a comment to a friend, "She's old and meddles too much," while they sat on the porch sipping lemonade, the humiliation compounded. The whispers and side glances at church, the ignored suggestions during town council meetings, every slight became a dagger to my heart. And I began to record these incidents, meticulously documenting the times, the exact words spoken, the witnesses present, and the reactions of others. In my journal, the yellow pages worn at the edges, the blue ink sometimes smudged from my trembling hand. And I realized that my tolerance had limits even as I maintained a polite exterior. My daughter continued her small act of cruelty on May 2nd at precisely 6:35 p.m. when she refused to allow me to help with the dinner preparations, throw the utensils on the counter, and saying, "You always ruin everything with your old-fashioned ways." I heard the clatter of forks hitting the ceramic, the sound echoing like thunder across the room. I attempted to reason calmly. "I've done this for decades. I know what works." She crossed her arms and said, "Nobody wants your help anymore." And at that moment, something inside me shifted. The decades of patience, the years of sacrifice, the careful nurturing of everyone around me boiled to the surface, and I understood that mere words would not convey the depth of this injustice. The next morning at 9:01 a.m., as I walked down Charleston Avenue to meet my friend Mrs. Thompson for coffee, I could see neighbors shaking their heads in quiet judgment, as if the public humiliation had extended beyond my home and into the very streets I had walked daily for 40 years. The smell of roasted coffee beans and fresh bread from the corner bakery mingled with the salty sea air from the harbor. A small child pointed at me, whispering, "Is that the old lady nobody likes?" And I realized that every small action had been magnified into a collective display of disdain. An exclusion pattern was undeniable: the arrogance of my daughter, the dismissiveness of friends, the subtle cruelty of neighbors, all acting as if my life and contributions were invisible. And it was in that moment on the bench by the fountain, with the sound of water splashing and pigeons cooing, that I made the first conscious decision to no longer tolerate invisibility. I began taking notes on every interaction, the exact times, the expressions of disdain, the casual cruelty in words spoken lightly yet cutting deeply, every witness, the neighbor filming with a shaky hand, the cashier at the grocery store who rolled her eyes when I asked for help, counting coins, a mailman who snickered as he dropped packages on my porch. Everything became part of a record, a ledger of humiliation that would later validate my plan and empower me. The subtle fear I saw flicker in the eyes of those who underestimated me became a spark of potential energy, and I could almost taste the justice that would come. The smell of my roses and freshly baked bread, once comforting, now seemed like a hair of the storm that was to arrive. If you have ever felt invisible, ignored, or humiliated by those closest to you, I want you to hold that feeling, because the next chapter will reveal the moment when silent observation becomes strategic action, and when patience and intelligence transform humiliation into power. And if you're feeling a pang of recognition, share your thoughts below, because what happens next is where the story pivots and the long simmering injustice begins to erupt into a force they never expected. It was the morning of June 10th at precisely 6:47 a.m. when I sat in my favorite armchair by the bay window, the sunlight filtering through the sheer curtains, casting stripes across the faded carpet, and the smell of fresh coffee brewing from the old percolator filling the room, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. And I finally felt clarity, a clarity that had been building over decades of being overlooked, dismissed, and undervalued. I had spent a lifetime giving financially, emotionally, and physically, sacrificing my time and energy to nurture my family and community. Yet every act was met with indifferent sarcasm or outright disdain. The events at the community center, the whispered comments by neighbors, the dismissive words of my own children, all crystallized into a moment of realization that enough was enough. I traced the outline of my grandmother's gold locket in my hand. The cool metal grounded me as I took a deep breath and formulated a strategy not born of anger, but of precision calculation. I remember the exact bank balance, $21,763.84, the small stack of gold coins inherited from my grandfather, hidden in the cedar chest in the attic, the intricate network of friends, neighbors, and colleagues who trusted me with responsibilities and information they would never suspect I could wield. And it was in that moment that I decided to orchestrate an act so bold, so undeniable, that the world would be forced to recognize my presence and power. I would fake my death and watch the reactions from afar, capturing every tremor of panic, disbelief, and shame. I opened my journal dated May 27th and started outlining the plan, meticulously recording dates, times, and sequences of communication, the messages to send the precise wording that would convey authenticity, yet leave room for maximum shock. I reviewed the legal documents in the safe deposit box at Citizens Bank on Elm Street and confirmed the minor arrangements needed to make the scenario plausible. The smell of aged paper and ink filling the quiet room. I rehearsed the text messages in my head, crafting each word with care. I envisioned my daughter reading the notification of my death, her eyes widening, her hands shaking as she dropped her phone, the vase of tulips toppling from the table, creating a small chaos in the otherwise pristine living room. I imagined neighbors catching wind of the news, their whispers growing into audible panic, the subtle vibrations of cell phones alerting everyone in my network to fear. The disbelief, the momentary realization of how much they had underestimated me. It was intoxicating, not in cruelty, but in the satisfaction of justice about to be revealed. I walked a window overlooking Maple Street and noted the exact time, 7:03 a.m. Birds chirping, the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's garden wafting through the air, the subtle breeze carry it all. And I knew that within the hour the world would be compelled to acknowledge my presence. I remembered the small interactions that had fueled this strategy, the cashier at the local market who had smirked at my careful coin, counting the mailman who snickered at my packages, the whispered comment by Mrs. Henderson across the street, "She's always been too old to matter Every slight, every dismissal, every act of arrogance had been recorded mentally and physically. It was a ledger of humiliation waiting to be balanced. I prepared a final cup of coffee, poured it into my favorite mug, the one with a faded image of Charleston Harbor, and sat back, noting the time 7:12 a.m. I reviewed every step. Once more, the messages, the confirmations, the legal documents, the backup plan of suspicion rose, and I realized the calmness I felt was different from the anxious trembling of the past. It was a serene certainty, a quiet storm gathering strength, and I whispered to myself as I sent the final message to my daughter and family group chats. This is not vengeance, this is recognition. The words felt heavy yet liberating, and as the read, receipts came in almost instantly. The panic began. I could hear the faint ringing of my phone from missed calls, frantic texts, and the muffled sobs from the living room captured inadvertently on the video call I had set up to record reactions. I saw my daughter drop her cup, the tulips wobble, and the neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, looking through her binoculars from the porch, nearly topple her chair to shock the plan, was working flawlessly, and I felt a strange combination of sorrow for the chaos my absence was causing and pride in the execution of decades of meticulous preparation. And if you have ever felt powerless, unappreciated, or ignored, I want you to hold on to that feeling. Because it is in moments like these that patience and strategy reveal their full power. And I want you to ask yourself how you would act if your years of dedication were suddenly acknowledged in a way that could not be ignored. And if this resonates with you, share your thought below, because the next chapter is where the revelation of true power flips the story completely, and the unsuspecting world begins to see you in a new light. By 7:25 a.m., the reactions had begun cascading like dominoes across Charleston, and beyond the first text message to my daughter had been read the little blue check marks glaring on my phone screen, confirming she had seen the words, "I faked my death." The initial shock was almost tangible. I imagined her standing in the middle of the living room, the vase of tulips toppled over, the smell of fresh bread lingering in the air, and her hands shaking as she pressed the phone to her chest. I could hear the faint sobs of my grandson, whispering, "Mom, what's happening?" while the neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, was filming discreetly from the porch, her shaky hands capturing every nuance of disbelief, the color draining from my daughter's face as she realized the consequences of ignoring decades of dedication. I sent a follow-up message to my spouse detailing the emergency arrangements, the exact time of the so-called passing 7:28 a.m. with instructions for contacting neighbors and friends, as if I were gone. The text included precise amounts from my checking account, $21,763.84 allocated for emergency family support, the small stack of gold coins referenced in a cryptic note tucked in the cedar chest, the aroma of lavender sachets mingling with the lingering smell of coffee in the kitchen. The layered details lent credibility to the ruse, and suddenly the entire household was caught in a whirlwind of panic. My daughter called 7 times in a row, leaving frantic voicemails, each one escalating in tone, her words sharp and trembling. "Mom, please answer. This is serious. We need you." The urgency in her voice only amplified the satisfaction of the reveal. I watched calmly as messages poured in from friends, neighbors, colleagues, almost everyone I had helped over the years, expressing shock, disbelief, concern. The power I had silently accumulated over decades was now unmistakable and completely visible. The realization that the quiet woman who baked pies and knitted blankets had orchestrated this entire sequence was too much to comprehend for them. And in the background, I could hear Mrs. Henderson whisper to a friend across the street, "I had no idea she was capable of this." While my grandson clutched his phone in disbelief, the smell of fresh roses and the faint cinnamon from the previous night's baking now a backdrop to a storm of human emotion, I recorded the reactions, meticulously video and screenshots capturing each facial expression, the pale lips, the widened eyes, the trembling hands, every flinch, every gasp, all confirming the magnitude of the impact. My daughter crossed her arms and said aloud, She's been hiding this all along," a statement that echoed the incredulity of everyone present. And I realized that this moment marked the complete inversion of our household dynamic. What they had assumed about me, the underestimation, the casual disregard, every slight was now illuminated and undeniable. The documents I had quietly prepared in advance were strategically revealed, the bank statements showing $21,763.84 in savings, the gold coins with certification, papers, the letters from neighbors confirming small favors rendered over decades. The credibility of my plan was airtight, and every witness from Mrs. Thompson on the porch to the cashier at the corner store, who had always smirked, now recognized the power. I wielded the atmosphere in the room, changed from panic to awe to a quiet. Respect the exact sequence of my messages at 7:32 a.m. prompted the family group video call to inadvertently include neighbors and friends capturing the moment in real time. The mix of shock, disbelief, and sudden acknowledgement was almost theatrical as my daughter whispered, I never realized. The tone of shame and respect mingling in her voice the entire sequence was a testament not only to strategic intelligence, but also to the slow accumulation of power and experience over decades. My calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the frantic energy around me, and in that calm, I found profound satisfaction, the kind that only comes from seeing years of quiet labor recognized, and from knowing that the humiliation and disregard were now reversed. In their eyes, the sense of control was intoxicating, but not cruel. I did not gloat. I simply observed and allowed the natural consequences of their arrogance and disregard unfold before them. The smell of coffee, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the texture of the old cedar chest, and the faint scent of lavender all became symbols of the quiet strength I had always carried, yet they had never noticed the acknowledgement. Now visible, the plot twist was complete. The powerless, perceived as powerless, now clearly possessed the authority to influence the entire environment. And as the first tears of understanding rolled down my daughter's cheeks, the phone call from the neighbor captured all. I realized that this revelation was not only about family dynamics, but a universal statement to anyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. The quiet accumulation of wisdom, patience, and resources can manifest in a moment of undeniable power and recognition. And if you have ever felt unseen, undervalued, or ignored, I want you to reflect on how the smallest seeds of persistence and intelligence can eventually blossom into a force impossible to ignore. And if the story shocks you or inspires you, share it with someone who needs to see the hidden power that can lie in ordinary lives, because what follows next in the consequences is where justice becomes visible and immediate, and no one who underestimated me will forget this day. By 7:45 a.m., the full weight of the revelation had spread across Charleston. Like a wave, the phone calls, the text, the frantic messages from friends, neighbors, and relatives all converged, creating an almost tangible tension in the air. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread in my kitchen, mixed with the faint scent of roses outside the window, became a backdrop to the chaos unfolding. My daughter paced back and forth in the living room, clutching her phone, her voice trembling. Mom, please, I don't know what to do, she said over and over. The vase of tulips still lying on the floor, a quiet witness to the shock. My grandson stared at the screen, unable to comprehend the sudden shift in reality. The neighbors watched from the sidewalks, whispering in astonishment. Mrs. Thompson, holding her phone, capturing every moment. The expressions of disbelief of my family now mingled with awe. I observed, quietly noting precise timing, 7:47 a.m. My spouse dialing repeatedly, my daughter sending frantic messages to everyone in her contacts. The exact sequence meticulously captured in my journal, the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock marking each second of unfolding justice. And then the unexpected began. The local community started contacting me in concern and support. The secretary at the Charleston Community Center called 7:52 a.m. We heard the news. We want to check on you, she said over the phone, her voice a mix of relief and concern. And suddenly the network of people who had always underestimated me reached out to offer aid, reassurance, and recognition. My inbox flooded with messages not only from neighbors and friends, but from colleagues at the accounting firm where I had spent 28 years meticulously working every detail of financial statements, organizing budgets, and mentoring younger employees, all acknowledging the years of dedication I had quietly given the office parties the careful attention to. Detailed the mentorship that went unnoticed. We never realized how much you had done for all of us. One email read with the timestamp 7:55 a.m., and in real time, I could feel the shift. The humiliation of decades had been inverted. The authority and respect I deserved now undeniable and publicly visible. My daughter sobbed quietly, the first tears of humility and recognition rolling down her cheeks as she whispered, I was wrong. The public acknowledgement through neighbors and community members created a collective witness effect, amplifying the justice not just within my home, but in the wider community. The video footage captured by Mrs. Thompson went viral among friends and acquaintances, each frame showing disbelief, panic, and eventual recognition. The smell of baked bread, the soft sunlight, and the faint scent of lavender mingled with the subtle noise of phones ringing with missed calls from friends and family. all creating a symphony of consequence, and the emails and texts began to include offers of apologies and support letters from neighbors and colleagues acknowledging the contributions I had quietly made over decades. The gold coins and bank statements that I had subtly hinted at in my messages became focal points for discussions about respect recognition and value. The meticulous documentation I had prepared for years now serve as undeniable proof that the efforts of the older generation are not to be dismissed lightly. The messages in community group chat exploded with reactions. "We never appreciate her. I can't believe we ignored all she did. She has always been so powerful quietly." Every acknowledgement reinforced a reversal of humiliation. The antagonist's arrogance shattered my daughter's previous sense of entitlement, replaced by a deep recognition of oversight. An error. My spouse now looked at me with a mixture of admiration and all realizing the decades of patience, strategy, and intelligence had culminated in an unmistakable display of competence and authority. In that moment, I understood the power of calm, strategic action combined with the visibility of consequence. Even as I sipped my now lukewarm coffee, the taste bittersweet, I realized the social and emotional justice had been served. Each expression of awe, each whisper of recognition, each digital message and live video confirmation became proof that the quietest person in the room could wield the most significant influence when intelligence, patience, and preparation converged. A public acknowledgement from neighbors, colleagues, and friends created an undeniable social record, reinforcing the lesson the arrogance and dismissiveness of the past had consequences visible in real time, and I felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from seeing years of invisible work now undeniable. I wanted to reflect on this moment. If you have ever felt dismissed, undervalued, or ignored, know that justice is possible even without confrontation if strategy, patience, and careful planning are applied. And if the story resonates with you, share it with someone who needs to see the hidden power that can arise from decades of quiet dedication, and observe how the smallest acts of persistence can accumulate into a moment of undeniable justice. And as the community began acknowledging my contributions, the antagonist, faces pale with disbelief. The power dynamics had shifted completely. The once dismissive daughter now humbled. The neighbors and friends fully recognizing my authority. The sense of triumph was quiet but profound. And if you have ever been underestimated, know that one day the careful accumulation of wisdom, resources, and patience can turn invisibility into undeniable presence. And the next chapter will reveal the lasting transformation and reflection, the universal lesson, and the emotional connection that will inspire all who hear the story. By the afternoon of June 10th, the storm had calmed. The initial chaos of panic messages, frantic calls, and shocked expressions had settled into a quiet reverence. The sun streamed gently through the bay window, casting long golden stripes across the faded carpet. The aroma of roses and lingering coffee in the kitchen now signaled not fear, but peaceful recognition of power and change. My daughter sat quietly in the living room, her hands folded. In her lap, the tulips had been righted, and their soft fragrance mingled with the faint scent of cinnamon from earlier. The house felt different, charged with an invisible acknowledgement of respect and humility. My grandson peeked from behind the couch, whispering softly, "Grandma, you're amazing." And in that small moment, I felt a deep emotional satisfaction. Decades of unnoticed dedication validated, and recognized the neighbors who had watched from porches across the street nodded in quiet understanding. A subtle smile on Mrs. Thompson's face as she lowered her phone and whispered to a friend, "She's always been stronger than we thought." The emails and texts continued to arrive from friends, colleagues, and community members, now expressing gratitude, respect, and acknowledgement for contributions that had long gone unrecognized. The balance of injustice had been restored not through confrontation, but through strategy, patience, and careful orchestration. The lesson was clear: the quiet accumulation of wisdom, effort, and resources can manifest in transformative power when the moment is right. And I realized that the events of the morning had not just shifted perception in my household, but created a ripple effect of reflection across the community. And even within myself, I felt a permanent transformation of confidence rooted in experience, patience, and foresight, knowing that being underestimated was never weakness. It was a hidden advantage, a reserve of dignity and capability waiting for the right moment to assert itself. I walked through my garden in the soft late afternoon sun, the texture of the grass under my feet cool and comforting, the scent of jasmine mingling with roses and freshly baked bread from the kitchen. And I reflected on the journey from invisible patience to undeniable recognition. Each act of giving, each silent sacrifice, each moment a dismissal now reframed as preparation for a larger impact. The hum of the refrigerator, the chirping of birds, the gentle rustle of leaves all became part of the sensory tapestry that had witnessed my transformation, and in that reflection, I wanted to reach out to others who have felt dismissed, undervalued, or ignored. If you have ever been overlooked, know that your patience, intelligence, and strategic awareness can turn invisibility into influence, and that one day recognition will arrive in a form more powerful than confrontation, more lasting than anger. And I want you to engage with this story. I want you to leave a comment sharing your own experiences of being undervalued or ignore, reflect on how you can harness your own hidden power. And if you feel inspired, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to join a community that celebrates resilient strategy and empowerment. Share the story with friends or family who need to see that strength and dignity can turn long suffering into triumph, and engage in the conversation below because the lessons here are universal and deeply emotional. Finally, remember that transformation is not only about changing how others see you, but how you see yourself, embracing the patience, foresight, and intelligence that have been cultivated over decades. And I want you to carry that with you as a universal truth. The quietest voices often harbor the loudest power. The unacknowledged efforts often accumulate into undeniable influence, and the underestimated can orchestrate profound change. And as the sun set over Charleston Harbor, the golden light reflecting off the water, I felt an enduring sense of empowerment, a closure that combined justice, recognition, and personal growth. And in the calm, I whispered to myself, and now to you, never underestimate the power you hold quietly within. The patience and dedication you have invested over a lifetime can transform not only your world, but the world around you. And remember to leave your thoughts below. Share this with someone who needs to witness resilience. Subscribe for more stories of empowerment, and activate the bell for future insights. And above all, trust in the quiet accumulation of your own strength, because one day it will shine unmistakably. And with that, the journey from invisibility to recognition concludes, leaving a lesson of hope, dignity, and unstoppable personal power.